That's where you see it.
That
Okay,
is
anyway.
so funny. Okay, let's get
I'm
started.
ready. I'm ready.
You're ready. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back. Today is so interesting. We have Charles Feltman joining us, and Charles is the expert in trust. Right? So today's topic for me, I'm so passionate about it. And I'll just start with that before we introduce Charles. Because as a coach, and this is directed to you, Charles, as well, one of the fundamental key things that I notice surfaces over and over and over again in many shapes and forms is this theme of trust. People not trusting themselves, trusting other people, teams, and so on and so forth. So this topic is so rich. I'm thrilled that you're with us. Let me just do a quick intro on Charles. Charles is an author of The Thin Book of Trust. He also has his own podcast. I'll tell you more about that at the end of today's session, but we're going to be scratching the surface of this really rich topic. And his series on trust really deconstructs trust. And if you're interested to go take a deep dive, please go and listen to Charles's podcast as well. So Charles serves people who seek to grow themselves into the leaders their teams and companies need them to be. So I really love that summary of what you're up to, with an emphasis on trust. So welcome. Let me start by just asking you, of all the topics that's available, why trust for you?
And that's a really good question for me to try and find an answer to. So it's fundamental to every relationship we have, right? I mean, it's part of every relationship we have. And so it's not only trust, it's like the range from full trust to distrust. So every relationship we have has some aspect of trust associated with it. So I hear that from my clients when I'm coaching them, from the teams that I'm working with. And so interestingly, I guess I first kind of became aware of it as a concern when I was in an undergraduate school at University of California, Santa Cruz. And I sort of was recruited to become a mediator, sort of a community dispute mediator. And the person who recruited me knew me and kind of identified me as someone who could help other people build trust with each other. And told me that, and I thought, really? This is interesting. So I learned how to do it and started doing it. And sure enough, that is something that I discovered I had some talent in, is helping people build trust with each other. But I also recognized that, I have to be able to build trust well with other people. And I didn't really have a toolkit for that. And
At that time, you didn't have a toolkit.
No, I didn't have a toolkit for it. I didn't have a framework for it. Just sort of, it was all hit or miss. And what seemed to build trust in some situations didn't so much in others. And so I kind of, like most of us, went through life experimenting and seeing what happens. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It wasn't really until I started coaching, I'd already started coaching, and I took a coach training program from Newfield Network, and was introduced to this concept of some different assessment domains of trust. That was the first time I got a framework for it. And so I started playing around with that framework with my clients, and it really helped them. At the time, there were only 3 aspects of trust, or trust assessment domains, as we talked about them. Ways of determining, can I trust you? Should I trust you? To what extent should I trust you? There was what we called care, sincerity, and competence. But then I, interestingly enough, ran into a fellow named Tony Simons, who was an academic, who, he was a professor at Cornell University. And I ran into him because I read a paper in, well, not a paper, but a short article in Harvard Business Review where he had done some research, and the research concluded pretty clearly that even a little bit of increase in trust between people who work together in a company paid off at the bottom line in pretty big ways. So I contacted him. I said, "Hey, can we talk about this? Because I'm working with people and teams in companies, and I'm finding that they have issues with trust, and I'm helping them do that, but they don't always believe that that's an issue for them. And so how can I kind of help them, help?" So he introduced me to the whole concept of, or the whole body of work done by academics who mostly write, they do their research and they write articles that are peer reviewed and they put them in journals, and those journals don't get read by hardly anybody who isn't in some academic institution. But they do really interesting stuff. And so I started reading stuff, and I ended up adding this fourth domain, assessment domain, care, into the, so sincerity, reliability, and competence. I think I said them wrong the first time.
So the original
set,
yeah. The original set was reliability, and you added in care.
Yeah, sincerity, reliability, and competence. And then I added care, which turns out to be probably the most important one. But we can kind of get into that if you want, like what these different trust domains.
I would love that. So here's what's interesting to me, is this idea of people working in teams. This is what's lingering for me in what you've said, and the different elements of trust, right? So I'd love to go into care. I just want to ask you this question, which is, when you work with teams, what do you notice are the key destabilizers when it comes to trust in teams?
Lack of transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Power differentials that are used by, like one individual kind of asserts power over other people and shuts them out of processes.
Which then leads to lack of transparency.
Yeah, partly yes, and it certainly leads to lack of trust. And then, well, so let me talk about them in terms of these 4 different assessment domains. It might be easier. One of the biggest ones actually is reliability. Reliability is an assessment, a trust assessment that you will meet the specific commitments that you make. So if you say you'll bring some particular set of data to our next team meeting so that we can all use it and work with it, and I do it, then you can continue to trust me in that domain. But if I fail to do it, and I fail to do it a few times, pretty soon you're going to not trust me in the domain of reliability. I'm not keeping my commitments. So that's a big destabilizer with relationship to trust. And I work with a lot of teams around how to, a particular way to improve that situation. How to create accountability around people doing what they say specifically that they're going to do. So that's one. But care, going back to that one, is another big one. Does my leader care about me? Do the other people on the team care about me? I'm sure you've heard the term psychological safety. Psychological safety is built on top of trust. When there's trust, particularly in the domain of care, care is, I kind of define it, if you will, as I trust that you have my interests in mind as well as your own when you make decisions and take action. You support me, you have my back. So if I feel that way about you, if I'm on a team and I feel that way about my team leader, and I feel that way about the other people on the team, that they really do intend good for me, that they do really have my interests in mind, that's kind of the foundation for psychological safety.
Yeah, just pause there for a minute because this is fascinating. So, care doesn't mean, and I'm talking in the context of a team, right? So care doesn't. So if I'm a leader of 50 people in my team, I'm thinking it doesn't mean that I need to be best friends with everyone. So when we talk about care, that's not, there are different gradients of care, right? And so so what I'm hearing is that it's sending the message that I have your back. Would that be accurate, Charles?
Yes. That I
Okay.
have your interests in mind.
Yeah.
That I have your or at the very least, I have the interests that I have are aligned with the interests that you have. I'm not working at cross purposes to you. I'm not trying to undermine you. You're not trying to undermine me.
Okay. And then just to add a layer, it would also mean that it's reciprocated. So in other words, there's one leader, there's a team of 50 people, for example. The 50 people get it that this leader is in alignment. They have our back. He or she has my back. And there's trust, like I trust my leader. And I'm going to guess to create powerful trust on that team, it would also be vice versa, right? Where
yes,
I have my leader's back.
Yeah.
Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. Yes.
So it's not one way, right? It's a round trip.
It's trust is always two way.
Got it.
Well, not always. People can misplace their trust in the wrong people. But when it's strong, when it's the kind of trust that really, that it is foundational for people working together in an organization, and it really serves people, it makes things go faster and easier, and people are more creative, people are more innovative, all those kinds of things that we think about as things that derive from trust. Yes, it is reciprocal. It's a two-way street.
Okay. Did you want to say anything about sincerity and competence?
Well,
you spoke about two of them.
Team, yeah. So sincerity is basically the assessment or belief that you're honest. I can believe what you say, and that you act with integrity. That is, if you say something, I'll actually see you back that up with action, with behavior. So, there are little. Okay, I'm going to take a step back here. There are all kinds of large and mostly small behaviors that people do when they're just doing their stuff and not really aware of what can build trust or what can damage it. They can do things that damage trust in any or all of these different domains. And so there are a lot of small things that we can do that, for example, can build trust in the domain of sincerity. That, being honest is one of them. Walking your talk, as the saying goes. Or if for some reason you change your mind, you're going in one direction, walking your talk, and you change your mind, making sure that you keep everybody current, you don't leave anybody behind on what's going on for you, what's going on in your mind. So there's that. So that's what the domain of sincerity is about. And then in the domain of competence, it's, I trust that you have the experience, expertise, capability, whatever you need to actually do whatever the job is. And to a great degree, competence is about shared standards. Or let me put it differently. When I see or hear about a breakdown in trust in the domain of competence, I almost always find that the breakdown happens around standards that people have or expectations people have that are not shared. So I have a certain level of, it happens a whole lot in the kinds of organizations that I work in, the engineering and technical and scientific organizations that I coach people in and teams in, is there's this competence is kind of like the coin of the realm. If you're competent, then that's the first level of trust. And I've seen many times one person has a level of competence or an expectation of competence, standard of competence. It's here, and somebody else's might be just a little bit below that, but the person who has the higher level is not trusting the other person because they're not as competent, but they're not sharing that standard.
And when the
So
person,
the other person doesn't
deliver,
really know, right? Because they don't know what they're supposed to be delivering to.
Right.
So
this is so rich. It's so layered. And one of the, you talked about how to build trust, specifically to, I think it was sincerity, when it's damaged or broken. One of the things I would add is supporting someone to succeed, right? So what you've mentioned so far is being honest, walking my talk, keeping everyone current. There's also that element of not waiting for the deadline to go, aha, you didn't do it. See, I'm right. This person isn't reliable. But rebuilding trust that's been broken is to support people before the deadline and see how they're getting on prior to that. Would that be accurate?
Well, yeah, I would put that actually in the domain of reliability, right? So we're talking about specific commitments, right? So if I tell you I'm going to have, this piece of work done by X time, and it's going to have all of these elements to it, and just like I just did, I committed to a client that I was going to have a report on some work that myself and my team did with them, just a one page. So here's sort of the key outcomes that and I promised that I would have it by a certain date, and it would look like this. It would be one page, and not tiny type. And I wouldn't try to pack more in by making the type smaller. So for me, maintaining trust in my reliability is to make sure that happens.
Yeah, it's so powerful. Go ahead.
But what you were just mentioning is you can help people succeed in all domains. You can help people succeed in the domain of reliability by making sure that when you ask for something, your request is clear and complete. When you respond to somebody else's request to you, you respond, you basically say either, yes, I'll do exactly what you want, or, hey, I can't really do exactly what you are asking for. I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have the tools. I don't have the whatever. Can we do this? In other words, making another suggestion, and then negotiating until you get to a point of, okay, now we're clear what the commitment is, so that it can be followed through. But supporting that, helping people do that,
Right.
and then helping them, as the work is being done, checking in. I'm doing here, this is what I've got going on. I'm this far. I have these potential issues coming. We'll talk about it. In the domain of competence, I can check and make sure. Do you have the expertise? If you don't, let's work on that. Let's help you fix it. And all of that, actually, all of those actions are demonstrations of care. Demonstrations that I have your interests in mind. I want you to succeed.
So because I'm thinking, for those of you who are listening in, if this is a new topic, I mean, certainly not the word trust, but in terms of navigating it, working with it, if you were to help people come up with a practice that they could leave our conversation with and start to practice, what would that be? One thing, maximum two. What would that be?
Well, okay. I think one practice is to have conversations about trust, specifically with a team. If you're a team leader, talk with your team. Ask what builds trust for you. What's important for you to see me do and say, see each other do and say. That will tell you that you can trust each other. You can trust me. I can trust, I'll tell you what I need to see as well, that I can trust you. So I think that's certainly one thing that team leader can do, or even you can do it even if you're not the team leader. Right?
So I'm hearing co-create it, like you can co-create it with one another.
Yes.
And that practice, just doing that, I'm thinking, will create trust by just even asking the question.
Exactly.
Love it.
Now, I will put a caveat on that. It can't be a demand. And the person who's asking for this has to be able to listen and not argue with what other people say. Be curious about, help each other kind of say what they are trying to say, but not argue with them. Because what, for me, builds trust is something that's important to me. And if I put it out there, trusting that you will honor it and respect what I'm saying, and you sideline, that's not that important. It's, then trust is gone.
So there are conditions. I'm hearing there's a mood. There are some conditions to create the environment for trust to blossom, is what I'm hearing.
Yes. There's
okay.
a mood of, in that sense, in that conversation, curiosity, respect.
Yeah. Openness.
Listening, openness, and listening.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Nice. So here's a question for you, Charles. So we're talking a lot in the domain of the corporate world, business, teams, driving performance, that sort of thing, right? If we take it outside of the workplace and we talk about home, marriages, I'm just curious if you have any personal stories that you've had to really exercise some of these elements or assessments of trust in your own personal life outside of the workplace or with clients.
Well, yeah, all the time.
Where do we start? How much time do we have?
Really? Let's see.
Pick one.
My wife, Well, we have a strong high trust relationship, and that's partly because we talk about stuff. So, there's this wonderful image, I guess, metaphor that Brené Brown, if you've not read or heard of Brené Brown, you need to go find her and listen to her podcast or listen to whatever. Just listen to something that she's done. But she has this wonderful sort of image metaphor. Trust is made up of the small things in life that we do, and she talks about it as putting marbles in a jar. Every time you do one of those small things that builds trust, you put a marble in your jar, and then you have a jar full of sort of trust, if you will. Stephen Covey talks about it as a trust account or bank account. You can look at it that way too. But this jar full of trust, and when you need it, it's there between you and other people. But there are times when we think what we're doing looks trustworthy to other people, but we haven't really asked. So sometimes when we go to put our marbles in the jar, we miss. And the marble, and by the way, this is something that my colleague on the Trust on Purpose podcast, we do it together. She came up with this. It was brilliant. I mean, it's the whole thing, right? I'm merely putting what I think are marbles in the trust jar, and in fact, they're missing the mark and falling on on the desk and on the floor. And
that's right.
And then I look for trust when I need it, and there's nothing there.
Oh my gosh! I'm thinking. I know you mentioned your wife, but kids, right? Our kids.
Well, yeah, I have an 18-year-old. It's always in that one, it's how much do I trust him?
Yeah.
And how, there's that constant, so he's pushing boundaries and how he's now 18. So it's like, he's pretty well, on his way, but there's that whole time between about, 10 or 11 and 17 or 18 when he was pushing boundaries. He was not being, and having, getting to remember my own youth and doing the same thing. I was not exactly the most trustworthy teenager. My approach was to sort of fly under the radar, and just do what I wanted to do. And, but, there were things that I was not trustworthy as a teenager, and I don't think many teenagers are, probably for a lot of good reasons. But building trust, even in that environment, letting your child know that you trust them, and that you are going to call them on stuff, that you're going to.
Honesty, right? That's one of the elements.
Yes, exactly.
So powerful. So for our listeners, we're barely scratching the surface. We have some great gems here, and you can certainly take a deep dive by going to Charles's podcast, which is called Trust on Purpose. It's on Spotify. And also Charles did an interview with Brené Brown, also on trust. So check it out. Take a deep dive on trust. If you are working with other human beings, trust, certainly in my experience, is one of the fundamental pieces that support people to create success, whatever that looks like for them. So Charles, thank you so much for being with us. Anything you'd like to say?
Add one thing?
You sure can.
I think you mentioned at the beginning that I'm the author of the Thin Book of Trust.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also a really good resource if you can get yourself a copy of that, because that'll help with a lot of this, because it explains and talks about these different sort of trust domains, for example, that I spoke about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, no, this is very valuable. And also Charles is on our faculty for the team coaching certification, and also one of the program coaches for our Newfield program. So who knows, one day you might be having some very close working relationship with Charles. All right, Charles, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Tina.
Bye-bye.
It's
My
been fun.
pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.